My guest today is Denise Donlon. We all know her, we all love her, and we all wonder what makes her tick. Hi, Denise.
Hi, David.
How are you?
I am well. What a joy to see you.
Now, the pleasure is
Yeah,
mine.
yeah.
I'm glad you wore purple. You look lovely.
Well, I do understand the green. I
Yes,
understand.
I knew you
little
would.
TV bit there. Yeah.
And then you've got one of those things I want.
One of these snowflakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It was
That's
shocking when that news arrived.
That's
it was like,
very
whoa,
good.
what? Most people, and I found out at the ceremony, most people find out when they are a recipient of the Order of Canada that they think it's somebody, they're like, they must have made a mistake. I know. It's so common to hear that.
Could you imagine ringing the Nobel and getting that phone call? It'd be like, yeah, you're kidding me, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right. Like Bob, I don't know. Maybe I'll just hide for a week, not tell anybody.
So it all started at MuchMusic, didn't it?
Well, it started a little earlier. Do you mean the music part of it?
The part of your life that we really want to know about.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the MuchMusic part. I talk in the book about a lot of stuff before that. And, learning to book concerts at the University of Waterloo and, frying poor Stan Rogers' head because we were all just making it up as we went along. What's an agent? I don't know. Where's the Yellow Pages? But, and after that, I went to Vancouver and worked with Feldman and Associates as a publicist and, ended up on the Whitesnake Slide It In tour of Europe, 1984. And and then got to MuchMusic because MuchMusic was sending cameras across the country, or I should say camera, they never had more than one. And I was trying to get my acts on their air, and then they pulled me back across the country to Toronto and then joined MuchMusic. So.
That's an interesting thing now. Why do you think video has become less important now than it was then?
Yeah, I don't know if it's less important. I think it's more accessible now. I think, as in the MuchMusic days, we'd broadcast for 8 hours and then repeat it twice and then do the whole thing. And the conceit is we thought everybody would watch the entire 8 hours. And at the time, in the heyday, people did watch the entire 8 hours.
Oh, yes, I know.
Partly because it was part of the culture and the zeitgeist at the time, but also because they were waiting for their favorite video to come on. And now you can just dial up YouTube or, Hulu or whatever it is and find the video when you want it and watch it for as many times as you want it. So it's a different relationship.
The bands, the artists are still making videos, but MTV, much the rest of them aren't necessarily playing videos.
No.
And I'll ask you, why do you think that is? Is it because of YouTube?
I think partly it's because of, new digital technologies, new mobile, opportunities for you to watch what you want when you want it. But I also think that the business side of those videos channels changed as well. And MTV was one of the first. They knew they couldn't retain the audience they needed to keep them for a whole half hour, not every 3 minutes, every 3 minutes, every 3 minutes. And so they started to play more reality TV programming, stories that had, a linear narrative that would keep people from the top of the hour to the bottom of the hour, just to serve the advertisers. So I think it was a combination of being able to find what you want when you want, and also the business trying to force people into a longer tune.
Do you think there's a place still for video on broadcast television?
Yeah, I think there is, but I also think that there's, in a lot of ways, and this was probably the success of MuchMusic, it wasn't only the video, it was all the glue and the stuff that happened in and around the music videos, where, it was to find out what in heaven's name Steve Anthony was doing that day, or what hijinks people could get up to. During my time, it was about sort of adding some social relevance to it. So we did a lot of, campaigns. We invited the audience in. There was a lot of media literacy. There was, Pride Day. We engaged in those type of Environment Day and racism and all of that stuff. So I tried to pull a little bit of spinach in between those music videos, and it was really the drive for relevancy. It was like, it's not just Guns N' Roses and Madonna, it's like what's going on with those artists. What are they saying? Why do we care about what they're saying?
Today it seems that they care about the size of the artist's bum.
Yeah, well, you could say that style won over substance, and people say that a lot. In my time and in your time, You know, artists were very active. You know, Sting was in the rainforest, and REM was doing Greenpeace campaigns, and Geldof was doing Live Aid for the first time, and Bono was telling prime ministers what to do. Actually, he's still doing that. So when I was at the New Music, we took the artist's lead, and we were able to dive deep into those subjects. You know, gender issues and racism and you know, HIV/AIDS and human rights and apartheid, for example. And that's what was fun for me. It was like, wow, how do we turn these music videos and amplify what the artists are saying? And you know, that's why they treated us as partners rather than exploiters, I think.
So somehow or other, you jumped from the television right into Sony Records. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I went from MuchMusic. We just launched MuchMusic, and went to be the president of Sony Music Canada.
Why?
Well, partly because I was asked, and I seem to be just a girl who can't say no. But partly because when the artists were coming into MuchMusic, they were fully formed in many ways,
Yes.
or at least in their formative years. They'd already had a video and a record, and they were touring. And I thought it would be pretty exciting to work with artists, you know, really from the discovery stage, where you could, you know, find and nurture and celebrate and market and be a bigger part of that creative process. Turns out, you know, 5% of my time was actually spent on A&R, because, you know, my timing was spectacular in the record business. So the minute I walked in, you know, Napster, Sean Fanning had just given birth to Napster, and it pulled the rug right out from under the major labels, and they're only now just recovering from it.
Do you think, having been right in the middle of it, do you think that the record labels made the error of believing that they were in an ivory tower and couldn't be touched?
A little bit. I mean, I talk a lot about that in the book. I try and sort of analyze what happened, what I saw, and what I was a part of. And there's lots of mea culpas in there. But there's also a lot of things that I think, you know, the general public doesn't really understand from a business side point of view what was going on. Yeah, there was a lot of hubris. We'll fix it in the next quarter. J-Lo's got a big record coming out. Or we'll sue our way out of it, right? I mean, suing your customers is probably business 101 as a thou shalt not do. But on the other hand, you know, people say, well, why didn't the record companies just start their own Napsters? And they did. They tried to. But there was something called an antitrust regulation, particularly in the US, where you couldn't pull all of the labels together. So you had MusicNet with 3 of the 5, and you had Press Play with 2 of the 5. And, you know, people don't search for music by label. Yeah. You know, what's Beyonce? Is she on Arista or Reprise? Yeah. And so it took somebody like Apple, you know, Sweden or Switzerland in a way, to sort of come riding up the middle and provide that space where artists got paid, and that's a whole other subject about whether it's enough or not, and that they could all be in one platform.
I was about this time I was returning back to Toronto, and I was a co-founder of a company called Iceberg Media.
I remember, yeah.
And I recall going from record label to record label and meeting with people, and they would ask, what is it you want, David? And I said, I want to be treated like what we are, which is 12 radio stations in one building. Mm-hmm. And there was a total disconnect at that moment. It was like, you're not a radio station. And it was kind of, people, it seemed to me that there was this disinterest in learning about this thing called the internet. Do you think that's true?
I don't know if it was a disinterest so much as it was a very transitory time, right? The internet was disruptive. It was, you know, disruptive technology, as they call it now.
It still is, by the way. It still
absolutely. And it's still finding its way. I mean, we have 500 around the world legal streaming services now, but there's still a huge value gap between how creators get compensated and as I said, the industry is just starting to recover in terms of a global revenue piece. But yeah, there was a little distrust, and you know, I talk about it in the book a fair bit because it was also nobody trusted anybody, right? The artists didn't necessarily trust the labels and the managers and the lawyers and the publishers. And there were so many stakeholders at that time who were invested in it staying the same.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So suddenly this, the Wild West happens, and everyone's looking over here and saying, well, how do we even monetize that? How do we make sure that people are compensated correctly? How do we retain, the structures that we already have, because nobody wanted to mess with the structure, and at the same time, embrace it? But that's not to say that there weren't a lot of people who were so excited about the opportunities that the digital universe brought. We didn't have to ship things anymore. We didn't have to manufacture. We didn't have to take returns. I mean, when I was at Sony, we had all of those things, printing and distribution and manufacturing, all in the same building. So being able to cut those kind of costs was a huge opportunity, but there was a lot of learning curves going on at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm one of those 500 streams.
You are.
And the audience is very attentive. Mm-hmm. But I found that when the internet came along, it opened up a magic box. And it just let everything out. Mm-hmm. Music of styles that regular folks hadn't heard before. Yeah. Most folks, even irregular folks like myself. It just, suddenly it wasn't just the same 500 songs that you were hearing on the radio.
Mm-hmm. True.
Suddenly, when I had Iceberg, we had one channel called OneGroove.com, which was EDM, a dance channel. Yep. There were 23 different kinds of dance within the overall genre. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the same has happened with rock, and the same has happened with country. Suddenly, people realize that there's more to life than 100 songs.
No, absolutely. And, that was part of the promise of the golden age, right? It was like if you could cut out all the middle people, the middle men mostly, and go, directly to market, what a huge opportunity that would be for everyone. But it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose, right? And people still wanted to be navigated. They wanted trusted butlers, if you will, right? And so on your EDM channel, you also not only had to provide it, but you had to build trust in your audience so that they knew that for the best choices in EDM music, we're going to go to Iceberg. And that was also a moment in time, too, where you actually had to build that community.
I call them trusted editors.
Trusted editors, exactly right. And actually, as we look at the stats even these days, when the wealth of the universe is open to you, there is a different relationship that people have with music. The young generation, different from me, what I would, my big wall of vinyl, where I could always fit one more in there with my big sagging shelves, right? But I used to love everything that was on the record. And even if I found a record difficult, I would lie on the floor with my headphones on and work on that record. And generally, those are the ones that stood the test of time. So a new relationship now is more disposable. You listen to the song, you don't like it, or you do like it, or you build a playlist, or you share it with your friends. But we're also finding now that people are wanting to buy full play records. Mm-hmm. Should I still call them records? They want all of the artist's oeuvre if they're actually interested in that artist. So it can all work, but it's how do you monetize it and make sure that the people who are investing in the platforms, as well as the creators, can actually make a living at doing what they like, which is making great art.
Do you think this has been good for independent artists?
I don't think so. No. I think it has in some ways, but I also think that when you take the middleman out, independent artists become exhausted because they have to be hustlers, right? They have to be their own distribution department and their own publicity department and their own consumer, complaints department. And so the way to get paid now is on the road, where it used to be so you made a record to promote your tour. Now you're doing it completely topsy-turvy. And you're having to take advantage of all those other means, which is great. If you can crowdfund your record and couch surf your way across the country, fantastic. But I also think there's room for the artist who, I mean, I want my artist to spend her 10,000 hours making great art.
Yes.
I think great content is always the key. And if you're spending 9/10 of your time not on the content, but on the business around it, then the quality is going to suffer.
I totally agree with you. My background is primarily radio, as you know. And people are saying, well, radio and then internet streaming and all the rest of it. I've always say that it's not about the platform.
Exactly.
It's about what you put on the damn platform.
Mm-hmm.
But you sound like you're energized to the point where you'd like to get back in.
You know what? I've always loved hanging around with the creative people. I mean, I learned a long time ago in my first, guitar sessions in the grad club that I was never going to be the person in making the music. Yes. But I love being around creative people, and if I can be a help in some way, first it was concert promoting, and then it was being on air, and then it was in the record industry. The people need people they can trust around them. And the business is so different these days. I mean, I start to think that, maybe it's like the Medicis, right? Where the Medici family would take, Galileo and Da Vinci and Michelangelo and be their support. So I don't know if that's on the horizon, but it feels like it. Didn't 50 Cent ask, I think he asked the Gates to take him on. Anyway, we'll see. I keep imagining Ted Nugent in the Koch Towers in New York.
I'd rather not.
Yeah, I know.
But then you made another crazy jump. Mm-hmm. And you went from being at the high end of the record industry to being the high end in radio.
Well, yeah, there was a merger, Sony BMG, and I had the happy challenge of working off a non-compete for a year, at which point I went and worked with Frank Giustra, and we did some parties for the Clinton Foundation and raised whacks of money for a really good cause. And then, they came calling it the CBC, Richard Sturzberg.
How long were you there?
I was there just over 3 years.
Did you enjoy yourself?
I did. I've always had a fierce passion, I think, for public service. I know that sounds weird. And also for, social injustice. I've been somehow, love to, I've traveled, done documentaries in Sierra Leone and Northern Uganda and that sort of thing. Right back to the MuchMusic days where we did the Drive for Relevance there. So going to the CBC, which I believe so strongly in, I knew it would be tough, and it was tough. Because again, the minute I walked in, we were facing a $171 million shortfall, and everything was being considered, from closing entire stations to lopping off culture genres on the services. So
and they were going to sell the building over here.
And they're going to sell the building and lots of real estate, right? But I love that Canada still has a public broadcaster that can be the voice that can knit Canadians together. You can, in those tiny small stations in Iqaluit and in Whitehorse and in Saskatchewan, northern Saskatchewan, we need a broadcaster who's actually invested in serving the public, who works in the public interest, because we see what happens to media when it's motivated only by the money.
I've spent a lot of time inside the CBC, in front of the camera, behind the camera, etc. What I would like to see happen is I would like to see the CBC go commercial free.
I too.
And totally be supported by the people and or the government.
I too, yes.
That's, I think, where it should go. But I want to go back for a minute. Now, you mentioned two words that recently have been bandied about in the media, positively and negatively, Clinton Foundation. Mm-hmm. What were you doing there?
Well, so Frank Giustra, who's a very successful entrepreneur in Vancouver, works with the Clinton Foundation, and asked me, because it was going to be President Clinton's 60th birthday, if I would, produce this event for them. And so I said, sure, how hard can a dinner be? It was, I think my hair is still on fire. It was one night It was everyone from James Taylor to John Bon Jovi to, Paul Schaefer and Billy Crystal. I had to go tell Billy Crystal one of his jokes didn't work. Oh, that was fun.
Only one.
Only one. Wow, it was just a little wrong. It's in the book, but and at the end of the day, that event raised $21 million in one night.
Wow.
In one night, still a record in Toronto. And then 2 years later, we did another one, only 16 million, but it was 2008, so it was the beginning, of another crash. And the Clinton Foundation has been investigated 6 ways to Sunday, particularly, during the last election, and nothing. They have found nothing. It's ridiculous, but for me it was a real education in how, politics, particularly, and you'll see my bias here, the Republican machine can, I asked a friend of mine 3 months before the election, what's going to happen? And they said it's going to be close. And I said, you're kidding. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton? He said, yeah, he's going to say crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary, crooked Hillary, so many times that people will believe it. And gobsmacked. It's exactly what happened.
So now you've written the book. What's going to happen now? You're going to go. You're going to be a politician. You're going to run for government.
Yeah, no. As you will see from reading it, I have a very thin skin. But I do believe in who we are as a country. I'm delighted that now is our 150th birthday, and I think it's a really good time in our history to decide who we're going to be for the next 50 years. Canada can be a world leader in so many ways. Particularly in human rights and in resource. And it's an exciting time for us as a country.
I totally agree with you. There's a pride about being in Canada and about being Canadian that started, I'm going to guess, about 20 years back. And it's worked itself up. We're not at the chest pumping, waving, flagging stage yet, and hopefully we won't be. But people used to whisper. When you'd go to America or England and somebody said, where are you from? You'd whisper, right. I'm from Canada. Right. Yeah. Now people say it out loud. People say it with pride. And I really credit, and perhaps you'll have it disagree with me, but I really credit so many of the immigrants who have come to Canada, who know what other countries are like. They're here, their children are growing up. And I think that has fueled a lot of the pride that we have of our country.
No, I agree with you. I agree. We're a nation of immigrants, and the power, the knowledge, the thirst for a better world, powers all those great success stories. I also think we're an arts nation. I also think there's a lot to be said about our writers, our filmmakers, our authors, our musicians. And in fact, there was a study done by MIT, a few years ago, and they went around the world and they listed the top 10 people that individual countries around the world were known for. And Canada was the only country in all of those countries where the top 10 people were all artists.
Yes. Not
politicians, not businessmen, artists. And one architect, Frank Gehry, was in there. But you can call him an artist too.
Well, yeah, I would say he's an artist. I agree with you. I think a lot of the creative juices that flow in our country, again, flow from the diversity and the acceptance we have of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look at, even if you track same-sex marriage, for example, right? What happened in Canada, what happened in America. There's a story in the book about MuchMusic when we were the first mainstream broadcaster to put a float in the Pride Parade.
Oh, really?
And unbelievable. And it happened, Gregory Hewitt, he was an executive assistant. He just stopped me in the hall one day and he said, we should put a float in the Pride Parade. And I was like, yeah, we should. Yes, and went down and we started to organize it with David and Sheila. And as soon as we because our slogan at City was always, everyone's welcome, everyone belongs, yes, right? Yes. And that meant everybody, thank you very much. And the music at the time was like the Culture Club and there was a lot of great stuff going on. Yes. So we organized this flatbed truck. We went on air. We called it Much Comes Out. Pride Day officials were thrilled to have us there, and we imagined we'd be throwing out condoms and glitter and whatever. All the Electric Circus dancers were excited to be on it.
Yeah.
And then I started getting death threats. People would phone me.
Really?
We know where your kid goes to school.
Really?
We know where you park your car. Are you the dyke that's putting on this or teaching our kids to be fags? Literally like that. And it wasn't just one or two calls. It was a campaign. And I got rattled. Not because I didn't think it was the right thing to do, but because we'd had bomb threats before at the station, often around the diversity piece. And I went upstairs and I talked to Moses and I talked to Ron Waters, and they both said, we got your back. Good. And we went out that day because I came down those stairs thinking I could take on those homophobic troglodytes with my bare hands. But I didn't want to put the dancers in danger. I didn't want to put the station in danger. And we went out that morning. It was pouring rain at the beginning. It was a wet vac on the AstroTurf. And, off we went down Yonge Street. And that was a glittery celebration. And that day...
What year was that?
Believe it or not, 1999. Wow. I thought it was earlier, but it was 1999. But to still, Anyway, had we not done it, had I caved to the fear... then, the haters would have won.
Yes. No, I
yeah.
Trust me. I know what you're talking about.
I understand.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Isn't she fabulous?